So I know I've focused a lot of my questions on the issue of service connection, but how does the VA handle ratings for skin cancer?
Sure. The VA handles all cancer ratings in a sort of a similar way. When you're under active treatment, if it's a serious problem and you're under active treatment, they typically will give the person a 100% rating for the period of active treatment and then for 6 months thereafter. And then they go back and look at what's the severity of the remaining problems, if any. So with prostate cancer, for example, just because that's such a common one for our clients, typically during active treatment, 100% rating goes out 6 months after treatment is completed, and then they look at what are the residuals. Now, with the cancers, it's usually possible with skin cancer to get a complete remission. You can generally have the cancerous skin sections removed surgically and end the problem. It's not to say there won't be a recurrence, but you can typically, literally have it cut out.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Welcome to Victory Over VA. If you're a veteran struggling with the VA's disability system or just want to make sure you're getting the benefits you've earned, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update that could change your life. I'm Christian Terrison, here with renowned veterans disability attorney Francis Jackson of Jackson and MacNichol. Jack has dedicated his career to helping veterans like you win the benefits you deserve, recovering millions of dollars for thousands of heroes. This podcast isn't just for veterans navigating the system, it's for their families, their friends, and anyone else who wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with those who've served. So stick around because we're here to make sure you get the support you need. Now, today's episode is about
the joys of skin cancer.
Yes, skin cancer claims, which get very complex very quickly. So is skin cancer, I guess to start at the beginning, something that the VA recognizes as a service-connectable disability?
It does, yes. There are three major types of skin cancer, as you probably know: melanoma, squamous cell, and basal cell. And the VA recognizes all of those as potentially service-connectable conditions.
Okay, and so what circumstances would lead to service connection, I guess?
Well, obviously, as with all of these cases, it's very fact-dependent. But I think the most fun one I've had is a gentleman who argued that he should be entitled to service connection for the skin cancer on his face because he was in Special Forces, and Special Forces have berets instead of hats with brims. And so that was his argument, and the VA is still fighting about that one, but I think he's ultimately going to win.
I'm thinking of folks who were deployed to countries where the sun shines bright and hot and often.
Yeah, deployments in the Pacific and in the Persian Gulf obviously are the most common. But I kind of like the Special Forces argument.
We'll see how it ends up. I wish them success, though, certainly. But so what are, of the types you listed, what are the most common typically when it comes to claims for service connection?
My experience with this has been fairly limited, and they've all been about equally common.
Okay.
Melanoma, I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with. It's the most severe form of skin cancer, and it's common for people who've been exposed to the sun. Lifeguards get it. Oddly enough, school teachers get it a lot, and it's because they all have the summer off and they get out in the sun. But it's clearly the most severe. You may remember that former President Carter had melanoma. The good news, as he demonstrated, is that there are much better treatments than there used to be, and it's possible to completely reverse the effects in some cases. But going back to frequency, in my experience, melanoma, basal cell cancer, and squamous cell cancer are all about equally common.
Okay. Now, just by the nature of the condition, this isn't something where you go out in the sun and, the next week you have cancer. So when skin cancer is diagnosed years after service, can veterans still have a successful claim?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's like any other claim. It's really entirely fact-driven. So you have to show that typically there was exposure to the sun that you would not have had otherwise when you were in the service, being on a ship in the Pacific, for example, and that is the most likely cause of the subsequent skin cancer. And, sometimes you can show that, sometimes you can't. But generally speaking, you can make the case because remember, one of the most critical things about VA law is that it has a relatively forgiving standard of proof. You only have to show that it is as likely as not that what happened in service was the cause. So, it's like these cases where someone has lung cancer and they've been exposed to asbestos in the service and they've smoked. We know that smoking can cause cancer. We know that asbestos can cause cancer. But it's very difficult for anyone to say that, oh, well, it had to be the smoking and not the cancer, or it had to be smoking and not the asbestos, or it had to be the asbestos and not the cancer. The reality is they're equally likely.
I know when I've been working up a case and go to a medical expert for a nexus report, they'll often come back and say, I can't write this report. There's no way to tell if it was this factor or that factor. And when I say, perfect, put that in your report, they'll say, do you want to pay me to write a report that says we don't know and nobody can tell? I said, yes, exactly. And because, again, if it's a 50-50,
Yep.
the claim goes to the veteran. And that's something I wish a lot of veterans would know about, because when it is tough to prove, or when there is true unknowability, that means success for a benefits claim.
Yeah, it should. Sometimes it takes the VA a little while to realize that, but
That's an understatement. Yeah.
but the legal standard, you're right. As one of the early judges on the Court of Veterans Appeals, who was a baseball fan, put it, the tie goes to the runner.
There you have it. But I know you talked about sun exposure. What about, for instance, chemical exposure or certain radiation exposures? Are those successful paths? Potentially successful?
They can be. I know I'm repeating myself when I say it depends on the facts, but it depends on the facts. We haven't had a lot of radiation claims. Most of those claims, as you know, were driven by exposure to radiation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki after World War II, or the early atom tests in the Pacific in the 50s. So most of those folks have passed on. There are a few of those claims. I'm aware of other attorneys who are actively bringing a claim or two. But we had an interesting one that I think is still pending. I'll have to go back and check. But the fellow was a dental assistant, and for many years the VA was not very good about shielding those folks from radiation. I'm sure you've been to the dentist now, and they put a lead shield over you, and then they carefully get out of the room, hit the switch remotely. But they didn't do that back in the day, and this fellow got exposed quite a bit. And the last time I checked on that particular claim, it was going back to the board. It looked like he was probably finally going to win, but I haven't seen the outcome.
Okay. And I know that for some presumptive conditions that there are cancers listed. If you meet criteria A and have condition B, then that's enough. Are there any presumptions for skin cancers that you're aware of?
Yeah, melanoma linked to the burn pits in Iraq and the Middle East, it can be presumptive under the PACT Act, but it's not presumptive for Agent Orange from Vietnam, for example.
So when you're looking to support a claim for skin cancer, service connection, what medical evidence do you need? Obviously a diagnosis, but talked a little bit about getting a nexus report. But what should most veterans be looking for in their medical records?
Well, if I was a veteran considering bringing a claim, I would do two things. The first thing I would do, given how the internet works these days, is get on something like ChatGPT or Gemini and look at kind of the overview of causation in those cases and think about how that relates to my personal experience in the service, whether it was, as we've mentioned, being on a ship in the Pacific or being in the Middle East or whatever. Second thing I would do is, once I kind of had that general outline, is I would talk to my doctor and say, gee, this is my situation. This is kind of my general understanding from the internet of how this all works. What do you think? And I would tend to be guided by that.
And can private, dermatology records and private medical records be enough to prevail?
Generally speaking, sure. I mean, anything's possible. But most of the time, remember, you've got the three elements you have to prove. You have to prove that there's a current condition, and obviously if the person has skin cancer, that's not a problem. Mm-hmm. You've got to prove that something happened in the service, and that's the kind of thing we've been talking about, whether it's exposure to radiation or exposure to the burn pits or exposure to the sun or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you have to have, in the absence of a presumptive condition, you have to have a medical opinion connecting those two. So to answer your question more directly, it is possible that treatment records might suffice, but generally speaking, you need a more specific, direct medical statement saying A caused B, essentially.
Gotcha. And when it comes to those statements, who's qualified to write them? Do you need to go to an oncologist, a cancer specialist?
Well, the interesting part is the VA doesn't have a specific set of requirements for who qualifies. Mm-hmm. They will take an opinion from anybody who's even vaguely medical, whether it's a licensed practical nurse or a chiropractor, right up through a medical expert in oncology with, a 5-year residency. Mm-hmm. The difference is that they will give greater weight to opinions from people with more specialized knowledge.
Mm. So, it's good to keep that hierarchy in mind, especially if you get something like a bad CMP exam. A lot of times, those CMP exams will be done by, a certified physician's assistant or something like that.
And or if nurse practitioner.
Right, yeah. And if you can go to your MD, even if they're not a cancer doctor, they're just a general practitioner, that should still get greater weight, in a perfect world, greater weight than the physician's assistant or what have you.
Certainly it should, but as you know, when we are working with those cases, we try to make it a point to go to someone with the best possible credentials, an oncologist typically for cancer cases. But it's one of those eye of the beholder kinds of issues. Mm. It's up to the VA person who is doing the rating to weigh the medical reports and decide which report or reports they're convinced by. Mm-hmm. But I think it is always helpful to have the greatest level of expertise that you can get in terms of getting the opinion. I mean, if it's a family practice physician, so be it. But if you can get a specialist in oncology, so much the better.
Mm. So I know I've focused a lot of my questions on the issue of service connection, but how does the VA handle ratings for skin cancer?
Sure. The VA handles all cancer ratings in a sort of a similar way. When you're under active treatment, if it's a serious problem and you're under active treatment, they typically will give the person a 100% rating for the period of active treatment, and then for 6 months thereafter. And then they go back and look at what's the severity of the remaining problems, if any. So with prostate cancer, for example, just because that's such a common one for our clients, typically during active treatment, 100% rating goes out 6 months after treatment is completed. Mm-hmm. and then they look at what are the residuals. Now, with the cancers, it's usually possible with skin cancer to get a complete remission. You know, you can generally have the cancerous skin sections removed surgically and end the problem. It's not to say there won't be a recurrence, but you can typically, literally have it cut out. And so in those cases, typically the only remaining problems will be scars from the surgery. And the VA rates scars, whether surgical or otherwise, very differently depending on the size and whether they're painful and where they're located on the body. But unfortunately, skin cancer is common on the face, and the VA rates scars on the face fairly highly. If there's severe scarring to the face, they can be rated as high as 80% for facial disfigurement. But it keeps coming back to the facts.
Right. Always the facts in these cases. So for a veteran who had skin cancer and then had successful remission, and everything's resolved now, but they never applied back then because, like so many veterans, they didn't think it was service connected or didn't think the VA would listen.
Yeah.
What practical advice would you give to a veteran in that position?
I would suggest that the veteran look at what residual problems there are. With skin cancer, as I said a moment ago, most commonly it's scarring. For melanoma, for example, now they typically do these Mohs incisions, which are kind of a round incision then coming down to sort of a Y shape that they're able to do. But you just have to look at what current ongoing problems there are. And typically in your case, your example, a successful treatment, the only ongoing result is going to be the scarring. So if I was a veteran who had not applied and now was considering applying, I would look at the VA ratings for scars and see if I thought it made sense to apply. If it's a relatively small scar, not painful, not located in any really obvious place, not really disfiguring, probably the VA is only going to give it a 0% rating, so I might not bother. If it's a big scar and it's located in such a place that it's, there's movement of the skin there and it's painful, or it's on the face and potentially disfiguring, then I would seriously consider applying.
All right. Well, on that note, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Please be sure to like and subscribe and tune in again next week. Hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.